Chapter 44. Agent Snyder stood in the lobby of Ultratrans Corporation on a cold, windy Michigan day. He pulled his coat tightly around his neck as he shivered from the chill that seeped throughout his body. How he wished he was back in Washington, D.C., where it was warmer. Oh, it snowed at the nation's capital, all right, but damn, it never got this cold. The wind felt like little daggers piercing his skin and attacking his very bones. The receptionist, oblivious to the temperature, busily answered the phones and directed people to various offices. When Snyder showed her his badge, she directed him to a seating area that seemed frostier than where he'd originally been standing. The building's architecture reminded him of ancient Egypt, and he wondered if it ever got this frigid for the pharaohs. He sat for what seemed like hours, but was actually only a few minutes, when a large, burly man with a black, bushy beard introduced himself as James Carrington, the company's security officer. Snyder thought the man looked lost in a suit and tie, but he stood, anxious to leave the chilly, damp lobby. "Is it always this cold here?" Snyder asked, shaking the man's huge hand more for warmth than for protocol. "Sorry, sir, it is rather odd for it to be this bad this time of year, and if you're not used to it, it can really be something. Come with me, it's a little warmer in my office." The two men walked across the lobby and down a small hall where it was a little warmer. The heat was welcoming to Snyder, and he loosened his grip on his coat. They entered a small room packed with several filing cabinets and one small desk, and Carrington said, "Please make yourself comfortable. Would you like a hot cup of coffee?" "That would be wonderful." Snyder took a seat between two filing cabinets and was handed a steaming cup. He anxiously took a sip, and the warm liquid thawed his frozen bones, or at least it sure seemed that way. It definitely felt great to be holding something hot. Carrington took a sip from his coffee. "Well, now, what can I do for you, Agent Snyder? You're a long way from home." Snyder handed him the search warrant. "I'd like some information on one of your employees who died here about 20 years ago, a Mr. John Lawson." "Seems official. Why are you interested in someone who died that long ago?" He shook his head and read over the papers. "You know, the feds. We're confusing at times. Can you assist, please?" "I certainly hope so. Let's take a walk to personnel. You can bring your coffee if you'd like." As the two walked down the long, cold corridors, holding their cups tightly, Snyder decided to ask a few more questions. "How long have you worked here, sir?" "About 5 years now. I don't know of the gentleman you're asking about. That was way before my time. Would have been in the 90s. If I did my math correctly, I was still in high school. Here's personnel. They should be able to help you." Carrington introduced Snyder to the head of personnel and left to continue his other duties. Snyder glanced around the room and was impressed with the view. The room was quite large, and the outside wall was one large window overlooking the water. The icy cold rain was falling, and the countryside was turning into a winter wonderland with crystal ice forming on the trees and brush. "Nice view," Snyder said to the woman standing in front of him. "Yes, it is. Now what can I help you with?" she asked firmly. It was obvious that Mrs. Taylor didn't like the FBI snooping around in her office. "I need information on one of your late employees, a Mr. John Lawson." "Oh, my. A blast from the past. I remember him. Let's look in the files. This way." Mrs. Taylor entered a room that was loaded with with files from floor to ceiling. It was the largest filing room Snyder had ever seen. He was quite impressed. "Wow," he said. Mrs. Taylor thought a bit. "It is imposing if you've never seen one of these before. We can place thousands of records in here in such a small space. We've thought about going to a microfiche system or digitizing these records, but why go to that cost? This system has worked for us for years, and we just don't see any reason to change. The room is completely fireproof, and we're familiar with it and happy with it. Any information that needs data access is in the databases. This is just extra material that's fine in an old-fashioned filing system." "Hi, Beth. What can I get for you?" a young girl in her early 20s yelled from several feet up. She closed the files she was working on, pushed the button on her platform elevator, and then approached Mrs. Taylor and Snyder. Mrs. Taylor introduced the two. "This is Agent Snyder of the FBI, and this is Kelly, our file clerk." "Hi," Kelly said, smiling. "Beth, I finished with the files you gave me earlier, so I can help if you'd like." "That would be wonderful, Kelly. Could you please pull the file on a John Lawson? He'd be in the terminated files." Snyder looked at Mrs. Taylor and asked, "Did you know him?" "Not really, but one of my old friends did. She even worked for him. Oh, what was her name? I never heard from her again after she left. Oh, darn, what was her... Jewel, that was it, Jewel." Mrs. Taylor smiled, remembering the happy days all those years ago. "We had so much fun together. We'd go to lunch, a small group of us, and gossip about the corporate office staff. It isn't as much fun here anymore, but that was then." She continued to smile, remembering. "Here it is, Beth." Kelly grinned as she handed the folder to Mrs. Taylor. Mrs. Taylor smiled, then said, "Oh, could you pull Jewel Maxwell's file too, please?" Within a few minutes, she was holding both files. "See?" she said to Snyder. "It's a great system. Let's go into my office so we can talk and go over these." Snyder finally felt like he was making progress. They sat in Mrs. Taylor's office reviewing the files, and then she quietly said, more to herself than to Snyder, "Oh, I should call Sarah. She and Jewel were the best of friends." She pushed the intercom and dialed a number. Snyder heard the voice over the speakerphone. "Sarah Weeks speaking." "Sarah, it's Beth. Could you come to my office, please?" "Now?" "Yes, now. It's important." "All right, I'll be right there." Mrs. Taylor clicked off the phone and smiled at Snyder. "Sarah will be a lot of help to you. She and Jewel were inseparable. They were quite a pair. She'll be here in just a few seconds. She's right upstairs." Snyder continued to review the files as he waited for Sarah. It seemed that Mr. Lawson had been quite the playboy. There had been many sexual harassment complaints against him, and it was obvious that he had followed his own path in life. As he read through the files, Snyder thought of Carrie and how much respect he had for her. To ever consider treating Carrie in any manner other than purely professional would be completely out of the question. Not just because of how much trouble he would get into, but because Carrie was also a friend and partner. It was their job to protect each other, not to be protected from each other. He looked up at Mrs. Taylor and shook his head. "I don't understand how anyone could act like this guy did and get away with it." "You'd be surprised at what people do get away with. It just depends on who their parents are within the company," she said with a funny grin. "It can make a person wonder sometimes. Oh, here she is." Mrs. Taylor walked to her door to announce Sarah. The two ladies looked at each other in a warm, caring manner. Snyder could tell there was a special bond there. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to bother you, but this is important. This is Agent Snyder of the FBI, and he'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. You'll have to dig back to a time when Jewel worked here, but I believe you can help him more than I can." She turned to Snyder. "I'll make copies of those files for you, Agent Snyder, and you can take the information with you. Since you have a warrant, it's legal." "Thank you. I'd appreciate it." Sarah stood quietly in her tan suit with a green silk shell. Her light auburn hair was pulled back in a loose bun behind her head. She walked with a high level of professionalism, dignity, and grace. Snyder immediately took a liking to this woman, who was in her late 40s or early 50s. Sarah held her hand out to Snyder. "I'm Sarah Weeks, Vice President of European Exports. Exactly how may I help you, sir?" "Please have a seat, Miss Weeks." "You can call me Sarah. What exactly is this all about?" "We're investigating the death of John Lawson. He died in this office about 20 years ago, give or take a few. I understand you were friends with his personal assistant, a Jewel Maxwell." As he spoke, he looked directly into Sarah Weeks' dark green eyes and found immediate comfort. She had the kind of personality that made you instantly at ease. He felt like he could tell this woman anything. although she was a total stranger. He had never experienced this before, and it made him uncomfortable. Sarah smiled, and her beautiful eyes were reassuring to him. She seemed to be viewing a time that had long since passed, a wonderful and happy time, and it reflected on her face. "That was a while ago, Agent Snyder. Why are you digging up such old bones? I still think of Jewel from time to time. She was such a frail little thing." "What exactly do you remember about her?" "I thought you were investigating Lawson, not Jewel." "Well, actually—" Sarah understood and simply answered his question. "She was rather plain and didn't wear any makeup. Many people used to pick on her, tease her." She paused, remembering the closeness they had shared, but now concerned about what Jewel had gotten herself into. "We were close, Agent, but only here at the office. I know she had a young child. I only saw him once. I can't remember his name. Timmy, Tommy. It started with a T. She had this picture of him, a black and white. It was so cute. He was about 5 or so and was playing in the mud. He had the reddest hair and prettiest green eyes. I guess I thought he was cute because I understood how hard it was to be a redhead. I used to color my hair back then. I was pretty wild. I've calmed down a lot since then. I finished my college and, well, the rest is history." "Do you remember the day Mr. Lawson died?" "Sort of. Jewel and I and some other girls had gone to lunch together that day to a sushi bar. It wasn't far from here. It's not there anymore." She paused as if reminiscing of the good old days now past. "They closed after that terrible day. That store was blamed for his death. Terrible tragedy. A group of us would go once a month. I remember it vividly now. We were scared that we'd die too or get very sick just like Lawson did. We all ate the same raw food that day, except for Jewel. She hated sushi and always ordered from the cooked menu. Always." "I see. Didn't that seem odd?" "No, she never ate raw food. She always preferred it cooked, so that was normal. Jewel just wanted to be with us. She didn't go for the food." "Why?" "Did he go with you to the restaurant?" "Who? Mr. Lawson?" "Oh, no. We bought his lunch that day, and Jewel took it back to him. He paid for lunch every time we brought something back, and we never turned down a free lunch." "Did any of you get sick?" "No, just him. Jewel ordered from the cook menu, but the rest of us girls ate from the sushi bar. We were very worried that day, Agent Snyder. Jewel had just returned from running an errand for Mr. Lawson and found him dead on the floor. She ran screaming from his office. You know, she never went back into that office. I know because I cleaned out her desk for her. That afternoon she put in her letter of resignation. The company gave her 2 weeks off with pay. It was a very sad and scary time." Sarah looked off into the distance, remembering her dear friend. "I still wonder what happened to her. Do you know, Agent Snyder?" "We're trying to figure that one out, Sarah. Did she work for this company or a temporary agency?" "Oh, that's right. She did work for a temporary agency, but she had a long assignment here. It lasted about a year or so. She never wanted to work directly for our company. She said she enjoyed the temporary assignments. Less stressful, and if someone ever bothered her, she could leave and no strings were attached." "Did anyone ever bother her here?" Snyder asked. "Now that you mention it, yes. There was that older man we used to call Old Fart Fred." She laughed. "God, I haven't thought about him in ages. I didn't even know his last name, but he used to pick on us something terrible. Do you know whatever happened to him?" "Not really. He was just gone one day. Strange, isn't it?" Sarah paused. "Anything else, Agent Snyder? If not, I'm very busy. I'm expecting an overseas conference call any minute." She nervously glanced at her watch. "No, I believe that's all. If we have any more questions, we'll be in touch." "I'm sure you will." "I hope Jewel isn't in any trouble. She was a wonderful person, just very shy, never would stick up for herself. I always had to do it for her." They shook hands, and Sarah walked away with Snyder admiring the view. He wished She was still standing there. He could smell the lingering aroma of her perfume even after Mrs. Taylor re-entered the office. "Is there anything else, Agent?" she asked, waking him from his daydream and handing him the copies. Yes, ma'am. 2 things, please. I need to know who requested the work order for Jewel Maxwell's position, and can you tell me what happened to an older man named Fred, who worked here the same time as Jewel?" "Fred? Is that all you have?" she asked as she looked through the listing of employees. "He supposedly gave Jewel and Sarah a hard time." "Oh, my, I know exactly who you're talking about. He died." She flipped through the pages and found the name, Frederick Mull. Here's a Fred Mull. Let me pull his file. Oh, and the information on Jewel is in her file. I also found a picture of her. I made a copy of it, too." "He died?" Mrs. Taylor used the intercom and asked Kelly Joe to find Mr. Mule's file. The young woman soon entered with the file and handed it to Mrs. Taylor. As she looked in it, her face showed concern. "What is it, Mrs. Taylor?" Snyder asked. "This is indeed concerning. Look here, Agent Snyder. Fred Mull died the day after Jewel quit. I'd forgotten it was so soon after Jewel left. He was found dead in his home. Here's the newspaper article on him. It says he died from spider bites." Snyder looked through the papers himself and thought it was definitely unusual. It seemed that their little girl had been very busy. Chapter 45. Dr. Lewis and Mr. Davidson stared out the window of Executives Incorporated, watching the federal agents in the parking lot. The steaming coffee in their hands left a light film on a small section of the huge tinted window. Director John Green sat on the couch, not anxious to be included in the conversation. "Nice view you have from your office, Jeff. Isn't it a little large and presumptuous, though, for a government employee? Such a waste of taxpayers' money, don't you think?" Harold Davidson said as he sipped on his coffee. "My office is nothing like this. I think we should switch positions, don't you?" "Look, Harry, we have to run this place like a very successful and elaborate company. I'm the director of this fine establishment, and I have to look and act the part." Dr. Lewis took a sip and continued observing the agents. He was getting angrier by the minute. "Jealous, are we, Harry?" "Not really," Davidson answered, watching as the agents below entered the building. "What are we going to do about them and about Miss Edwards?" He turned and walked toward the sofas in the middle of the room. "Any ideas, John?" he asked Green sarcastically. Green didn't want to get involved in this little party and decided to just shrug his shoulders. He took another sip of cooling coffee and glanced up at Davidson, who was awaiting an answer. Dr. Lewis's blood pressure was starting to rise. "I'm not sure what we're going to do about those clowns, but we are going to do absolutely nothing about Maddie." He'd always considered Maddie the daughter he never had, and he wasn't about to let anything happen to her. "Jeff, I told you not to get close to these people. After all, they're expendable, right, John?" He used his elbow to nudge Green, who sat motionless and quiet. Davison continued, "This organization must remain clean and in the clear. Our country's safety and security depends on this agency and its ability to remain anonymous. If the press or the general public ever found out that Executives Incorporated is actually a non-disclosed U.S. government agency, our ability to quietly remove threats would be drastically hindered. And you know that." He looked directly at Jeff, raised one eyebrow, and grinned a sinister smile. Dr. Lewis exploded. "Harry, you're an ass. A big fucking hairy ass. I can't even stand to look at you." He turned away in total revulsion. "You may be involved, and I may have to listen to what you have to say, but I don't have to like you." His voice was getting louder and stronger with each word. Davidson walked to the kitchenette and refilled his cup. "You have a serious problem here, Jeff, and we may have to use Miss Edwards as our way out. When the newspapers receive their leaked story, she'll have to be labeled as a serial killer. There's just no other way. This agency simply cannot be implicated. She should not have screwed up." He turned and looked at Jeff and sarcastically said, "I guess we should be hearing about our visitors any minute now." Dr. Lewis continued to stare out the window in total shock and disbelief. He knew that the government was going to turn their backs on his dear sweet Maddie. How was he ever going to tell Nate? Although he knew this day could possibly come, he had never wanted to admit to himself that it ever would. His Maddie, the young lady who so bravely risked her life for her country, was now being stabbed in the back by those she had worked so hard to protect. "Damn it, no!" he yelled with tears in his eyes. "I won't let you do it!" He glared at Green and realized he was a useless excuse for a man. "Excuse me, Dr. Lewis?" A voice came from the speakerphone on his desk. "Yes, Marcia. The FBI is here to see you, sir. Shall I have them escorted in?" "Them? How many are there, Marcia?" "3, sir." "Thank you, Marcia. That would be fine. But give me about 5 minutes first." "Yes, sir," came the response from the speakerphone. Dr. Lewis went back to staring out the window, holding back his anger and his wishes to destroy the men in his office threatening his familiar world. Finally, he spoke without emotion and without turning around. "You'd better leave, Harry. Toby will recognize you. Division 275, Pentagon security. Shit, even I could have thought of something a hell of a lot more credible than that. And I still can't believe you actually had 2 of our agents attacked and beaten. You're a very sick man, Harry, very sick. Is this what happens to you when you work in D.C.? Your whole life? Do you really lose sight of what's right and what's wrong, what's really important and what's not? If that's the case, then I'll make sure to stay right here, right where I am." Davidson replied calmly, "So attacking the agents didn't work. I thought for sure it would have scared everyone off, and they would have buried the case. Like I said, you're one hell of a sick man, Harry. Now get out of my office. Both of you grab your coats and get the hell out of here before I personally kick you out." Davidson turned to confront Dr. Lewis. "You're starting to piss me off, Jeff. I don't like this job any better than you do. But with the way our laws are structured, this agency is necessary to ensure— I know the safety and security of our people. Bullshit. It's a power thing with you, Harry. That's all it is. A power thing. You live for it. You breathe it. You eat it. You exist for it. Get out of my office. You make me sick just being in the same room with you." He turned to face the man. "This is still my office, is it not?" Davison slammed his cup on the coffee table and grabbed his jacket. "I'm out of here, Jeff. But Maddie is history, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I have to protect this organization if it takes every ounce of my authority. I have, and don't you think I won't." Director Green followed Davison out of the room without saying goodbye. He was nervous, concerned only about what would happen to the agency and his career once the truth was released. Mr. Davidson and Director John Green left quietly through the back entrance and stepped into the elevator just outside the door. They had to get back to D.C. to determine their next move. "Maddie Edwards is expendable, and I can justify it," Davidson said quietly to Green. Chapter 46. The 3 agents stood admiring the massive building of Executemps Incorporated. It was an impressive place, completely covered with tinted mirrors and boasted a beautifully manicured landscape. They pulled their coats up around their necks for protection from the cold and headed for the entrance. The newly fallen snow gave the place a feeling of innocence that the 2 agents knew was just an illusion. "Okay, guys, this is it," Thomas said as he shivered. "I thought you were raised in this stuff," Owen stuttered back. "I was, and that does mean was." The warm air swarmed around the men as Thomas pulled the huge glass door open. They entered a breezeway and then entered the lobby. Owen studied the huge lobby with amazement as he removed his heavy overcoat. "This place reeks of money. It's like a city within a city." The lobby was a large room with several floors, with lots of decorative shiny metal and sparkling glass. Water gardens were situated sporadically throughout, with either a flowing waterfall or huge sprinkling fountain. Fish contentedly swam through the water, examining the plants for food. The 5 receptionists sat in a large round booth where they could observe people coming and going. They were dressed in regular clothes, but with one exception, they carried guns that were plainly displayed on their hips or in a shoulder harness. Employees used the optic scanner for interest, while visitors were logged in and then escorted to their destination. Behind the counter, the room sprawled out into a mini shopping mall with stores, restaurants, hair and beauty salons, and other establishments. 6 glass front elevators were busy running people up and down between floors. Thomas had always enjoyed it here and would often ask his mother to bring him for visits. "There's even an arcade upstairs," he told the other 2 agents. "Just wait till you see everything." He felt completely at home and was eager to show the place off. "May I help you, gentlemen?" one of the receptionists asked. As the men showed their badges and other identification, another receptionist recognized Thomas and approached the agents. My, if it isn't little Toby. "Hi, sweetheart, what brings you here? You know your mama is on vacation this week." Jolene White had been a receptionist for the company for over 40 years. She had watched Thomas grow from a little boy to an educated man. "I remember when we used to go for ice cream because your mama needed someone to watch you. Do you remember that, Toby?" "I sure do, Jolene. How are you?" The 2 shook hands, and Jolene grabbed Thomas's arm with her other hand in a warm gesture of love and devotion. "We sure do miss you around here, son." "I miss all of you, too." Jolene looked at his credentials and was amazed. "Wow, a real FBI agent, huh, Toby? Well, well, you are full of surprises. I bet your mama is proud." I'm sure she is, Jolene." Thomas glanced at the other 2 agents filling out the visitor's log. They were smirking at him, and he gave them an embarrassed smile. "Come on," Jolene went on. "I'll escort you on up. We can talk some more on the way. How are your babies, Toby? I'll bet they're getting big." Jolene White walked slowly to the elevators, escorting the FBI agents. At 75 years of age, her legs didn't move as fast anymore. Her curly black hair had long since turned completely white, and she now walked with a slight hunch in her back. Thomas and Jolene talked of old times during the elevator ride to Dr. Lewis's office. When they got to his floor, she apologized that she had to drop them off at his secretary's office. They said their goodbyes, and Thomas promised to stop back before they left. The 3 agents sat waiting until Dr. Lewis's secretary gained approval to escort them to his office down the hall. "Just a few more minutes, gentlemen. Dr. Lewis is a very busy man," Connie Bartlett whispered. Connie was in her 50s and very thin. Owens wondered if she ever ate. The 3 sat silently looking around the modest office, watching Ms. Barnett conduct her daily routine. Owens nudged Thomas once or twice and whispered, "Toby, sweetheart." Thomas responded with a shove to Owen's shoulder. Connie looked up from time to time as if watching the acts of young mischievous children. Her phone finally beeped, and she rose to escort the agents to Dr. Lewis's office. As they entered, Owens and Thurston were amazed at the size of the office. It was bigger than 4 of theirs combined. As he approached the doctor, Thomas immediately received a genuine smile and a giant bear hug. "Great to see you, Toby, my son. I heard you were working for the FBI. Your parents are so very proud of you, and so am I." "Thank you, sir." Thomas stood back to introduce his partners. "Dr. Lewis, I'd like you to meet my agents. This is Dr. Philip Thurston and Agent Terrence Owen. Phil and Terry, guys, this is Dr. Lewis." Lewis beamed as they shook hands. "I'm delighted to meet you. Any friend of Toby is a friend of mine. Please sit, be comfortable. Can I get you anything to drink? Coffee, soda, water?" "I'd love some coffee, sir," Thomas said, walking to the little kitchenette. "It's great to have you here. Make yourself at home, Toby. You've really been missed running around here. You used to be quite a handful when you were little. Please, gentlemen, make yourselves at home. Help yourselves, please." Dr. Lewis pointed toward the small area with a counter, refrigerator, microwave, and coffee pot. Owens and Thurston gave in and decided on hot coffee and joined Thomas at the counter. After filling their cups and giving Thomas a gentle teasing With the Toby routine, they settled down to talk business on the matching sofas that were strategically placed in the middle of the room just to intimidate the visitor. Dr. Lewis's office had not changed much over the years. He was a creature of habit and didn't like or appreciate change. Tall bookcases lined the walls and were filled with volumes of technical and other impressive reading material. The front corner was ceiling-to-floor tinted windows that gave an amazing view of Oklahoma City, which was covered with a light blanket of freshly fallen snow. A large desk with a plush executive chair was on the other side of the room, and huge oriental carpets were scattered throughout. 2 black vinyl sofas sat in the middle of the room facing each other, with a small rock coffee table between them and 2 overly stuffed wing-backed chairs at each end. Small Roman statues were strategically placed around the room to add a slight ambience of elegance. It was an impressive and awe-inspiring office. They sat quietly across from each other, the doctor on one couch, the agents on the other. Dr. Lewis decided to break the ice first. "Okay, so what can I help you boys with?" Owens and Thurston looked at Thomas for guidance, as if they were sitting across from the principal at school and they had just been called in for bad behavior during class. Thomas stared back with that "why are you looking at me" look and cleared his throat. "Well, sir," he said softly, "we're investigating the recent death of the senator from Ohio." "I see. Well, I'm not sure how much information I'd have on that, Toby," Lewis replied. "Oh, I understand that, sir, but what we need from you is other information." "And what exactly would that be?" Thomas took a deep breath and decided to just plow through to what he needed. Otherwise, they were going to be sitting there for an awfully long time. "Sir, in investigating the death, we have uncovered other deaths throughout the years that we have connected to this company." There, he had said it. He sat back with a feeling of great relief, but the other agents were now staring at him with complete disbelief. What Thomas had just said to Dr. Lewis did not make 1 ounce of sense to them. "I'm sorry, Toby," Dr. Lewis said. "Would you mind restating your question? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking for." He had a stunned and confused expression on his face and was frozen in position as if a snapshot had just been taken. Dr. Thurston decided it was time he stepped in. It was obvious that Toby was very intimidated by Dr. Lewis and wasn't thinking straight. "Sir, maybe I can help. In researching the death of the senator, we've concluded that it was a murder and not an accident. I'm sorry I cannot go into more detail for you at this time. Aside from that, we've tracked the killing to an individual who we believe committed the crime. She was working for the senator in a temporary staff position in his Ohio office. However, during our investigations, we determined that this was not her first killing. The reason we're here, sir, is because we've connected these other murders. There's a common denominator." "I see." Dr. Lewis rose from the sofa and walked to the window. "And the common denominator is Executemps Incorporated, is that correct?" "Yes, sir, that is correct," Dr. Thurston answered. Toby jumped from the couch and joined Dr. Lewis at the window. "Beautiful sight, Jeff." "Yes, it is, Toby." There was a pause. You know who we're after, don't you, Jeff?" It was a statement, more than a question. "Yes, I do, Toby." Another pause. Thomas broke in. "You'll eventually have to give us her name." "Yes, Toby, I know." Tears swelled in Lewis's eyes. He didn't want to break down in front of the agents. "Toby, I'll give you the name in due time, but not now. I'll need a couple of days to get all the information gathered for you. Let's just say that I can't recall who it is right this moment, but we'll look into it." Lewis turned to the other 2 agents. "Give me a list, Dr. Thurston, of places you believe this person worked, and I'll see if it matches any of our employees. Is that fair enough?" "Fair enough," Toby replied softly.